This week we're talking about dreams. And dreams, not everyone, everyone has dreams in the sense that when we sleep at night, our brain plays movies that we didn't ask it to play. And sometimes we can remember those movies and sometimes we can't. Sometimes they're fun and sometimes they're not fun at all. Everyone has those kind of dreams. If we didn't have those kind of dreams, my understanding is we'd all go mad, and that wouldn't be a good thing either. But not everyone has the kind of dreams that Joseph had. Dreams that were inspired and given by God. Dreams that were an image and picture of what God was planning to do in the future. Some folks get those kind of dreams. Some folks get that vision and inspiration from God. And maybe it comes while they're sleeping, or maybe it's an idea or an inspiration that comes to them while they're awake and thinking and working or playing or dancing or singing or whatever. And some folks get that. Not everyone does, but some people do. And we're going to talk today about dreams and reality, particularly when God inspires us with a dream, a vision of the future. And what does that look like, particularly when we're living in these systems that are stacked against us? Joseph was certainly living in a system stacked against him. He had 10 older brothers. And birth order was everything in Joseph's day. Had to be 10 deaths before he was going to inherit anything significant from his dad. On the other hand, he was his dad's favorite son. And his dad did Joseph the disservice of making sure that all of his older brothers knew that he was his dad's favorite son. You've probably heard the story of Joseph in the coat of many colors. We're just, little myth busting here this morning, and hope I don't burst anyone's bubble too much. It probably wasn't really a coat of many colors. Much less dramatically, it was probably a better translation as a coat with long sleeves, which you might think, wow, that's kind of boring. Not exactly for us, maybe, but a long sleeve coat was not a work coat. A long sleeve coat was a luxury coat. A long sleeve coat was a dress coat. A long sleeve coat was something you wore if you were important rather than something you wore if you were a servant. And the youngest brother got the long sleeved coat while all of his older brothers were out doing the hard work of tending the family's flocks. So it was definitely a sign of favoritism, that gift of Joseph of, here's a long sleeve coat for you. Just maybe not as visually appealing as we would like. Joseph had these dreams. And in the first dream, Brent just read it, his brother's sheaves, which symbolize his brother, they bow down to him. And then in the second dream, not only do his brothers bow down to him, but his mother and father bow down to him as well. Now, we're going to talk in a minute about the wisdom of telling his brothers about these dreams, but he did. He announced to the whole family, hey, I had these dreams. I had these dreams where you all bowed down and I was ruling over you. How about that, bros? And the brothers' response, we didn't get all of it. We got this in that reading that his brothers hated him all the more. But the brothers' response was this. The next time they were out in the fields and Joseph was sent out to them, and we remember as well, the last time Joseph was out in the fields with his brothers, he went back and tattled on his brothers and told their dad they weren't doing a good job. He just had all sorts of, PR problems going here, human relation problems. But Joseph goes out to see his brothers again. And after the tattling and after the dreams, the brothers decide to teach him a lesson. So they do what any good brothers would do. They beat the snot out of him, threw him in an empty cistern, and planned to kill him. But decided, hey, why don't we make some money from him instead? So they sold him to a group of people traveling through Canaan on their way to Egypt. They sold their brother into slavery. They got his cloak, dipped it in sheep's blood, and told their dad he'd been eaten by a lion. That was their response. To which I can only respond with the immortal words of Ron Burgundy.
Boy, that escalated quickly. It really got out of hand fast.
It jumped up a notch.
It did, didn't it?
Yeah, that escalated. That was perhaps a bit of an overreaction to a bratty, arrogant, snotty younger brother. Perhaps a bit of an overreaction. But that's what happens sometimes when we have dreams. There was a great general I had in my head. I can't remember whether he was either Prussian or Austrian. I think it was Austrian. Helmuth von Moltke the Elder. You know you're important when you got a name like that. And he was a very, very, very successful general out of Eastern Europe in the Middle Ages. And his most famous line that we know from him was this: "No plan of operations extends with certainty beyond the first encounter with the enemy's main forces." Because that's also a mouthful. That quote usually gets shortened and paraphrased to, "No plan survives contact with the enemy." No dream survives contact with the enemy. Whatever plans Joseph might have been developing out of this dream, whatever he'd been thinking about what the future would hold for him, he was not prepared for what was going to happen when he told his brothers, whom he had made his enemies, about his dreams. Mike Tyson put it even more succinctly and more colorfully when he was going to be fighting Lennox Lewis way back in the early 2000s, and he was being interviewed about that, and the interviewer was like, "Hey, well, Lennox Lewis told us he's got a plan on how to face you," and Mike Tyson's pithy response was, "Everyone has a plan until they get hit." And Tyson hit Lennox Lewis, and Lewis's plan went out the window. Joseph got hit. He got hit hard. And whatever plans and whatever dreams he had went out the window. Far from ruling over his brothers, he was now going into slavery in a foreign land with no hope of ever seeing his family again. A couple of things I want to talk about in this business of when our dreams hit reality. One of them might be the most obvious one out of this whole narrative, which is be cautious who you share your dreams with. Right? Not everyone's going to get it. And I got a hunch we got more than one dreamer in the room this morning here. And what's important when we have a dream is it's generally not a great idea to broadcast it, because not everyone gets it. Not everyone's going to sympathize with it. Not everyone's going to be on board with it. Some folks will use it as a tool to beat you up, to tell you how ridiculous you are, to tell you how foolish you are, to tell you how crazy you are. You need to let go of those crazy dreams, get back down to earth, and get on with the business of daily life. This is a struggle that I've had as I've been a pastor, and particularly working with kids for the past 30 plus years, is that kids tend to be dreamers, teenagers especially. And they haven't all been hit by life. Some teens have, but most teens haven't really been hit by life yet to know how hard dreams can be, how hard it can be for dreams to come true. And there's a risk when talking with young people when they share their dreams. I'm going to play in the NBA. I'm going to play in the NFL. I'm going to be a singing star. I'm going to be an actor or on Broadway or in the movies. All of these things. It's easy to trash other people's dreams. But stories like this of Joseph, who no one around him, not even his doting father, thought this dream of everyone in the family bowing down to him was going to be real. They all thought he was out of line. They all thought he was crazy. They all thought it was a ridiculous dream. And they were all wrong. Every single one of them. But they didn't know that. And Joseph, as he was going off to slavery in Egypt, didn't know that either. But he made the mistake of sharing his dreams with people who would not be sympathetic, with people who would not be encouraging, with people who would not be supportive. If God has given you a dream, if God has given you a vision of the future, there are going to be times for sure when you have to share that dream with people who will think it is absolutely ridiculous. Elon Musk understands this. Now, I'm not going to stand up here and tell you that Elon Musk's dreams are God-given dreams, but Elon Musk has had some wild dreams. You know, he started PayPal, made a whole bunch of money, enough money that a whole lot of people with that kind of money would have just said, hey, you know, I can retire and take it easy for the rest of my life. But Elon Musk decided to take his vast fortune and build rocket ships. And everyone around Musk told him that was a stupid dream. And it's a dream. For Musk, it's a dream. He really believes we need to become an interplanetary species if humanity is going to survive. And he wants to have a colony on Mars and maybe beyond that somewhere someday. And that's his dream. And everyone told him he was nuts. They said, you're going to lose everything, they told him. But he had this vision. He had this dream. And now he's the richest man in the world, on his way to becoming the first trillionaire in history. And SpaceX launches more rockets into space every year than everyone else in the world combined. Governments and private agencies combined. Musk, when he started sharing that dream, he had to deal with the reality that most folks weren't going to accept it. But you also need to find people that will buy into your dream, that will be captivated by the dream, that when you share it, they don't say, hey, you're nuts. You say, hey, how can I help? Where they could at least say, wow, that sounds amazing. I hope everything goes great. It's going to be tough. It's going to take a lot of work, but keep at it. Be cautious about who you share your dreams with. The other thing to be cautious with when we get a dream from God is to remember that receiving a vision, calling a dream from God does not make you better than other people. I think that was part of Joseph's problem here. You get the sense that with his dad's favoritism combined with his dream that he had, that Joseph maybe thought, I really do deserve to rule over my family. I do deserve to be in charge. I'm better than these guys. You know, that's the tattletaling is really the key there. That notion of I'm going to go back to my dad and rat out my brothers because I think they're not doing their job very well. I'm going to give them a bad report to dad. He's the youngest. He knows less about what they were doing than anybody there, but he was sure that he knew more and was going to tell them. That's not what a vision or a dream from God means. St. Teresa of Avila, who had visions and had dreams, used to say this. She said that God usually communicates with people that way because they're too weak and have too little faith to hear anything else. She said having the dreams and the visions, she said, is not a sign of being closer to God or stronger in your faith. It's a sign of being weaker in your faith. And God says, the only way they're going to get it is if I make it really, really like stupid plain to them. I don't know whether that's true. Can't verify that. Teresa taught that, I think, partly for two reasons. One, to help keep herself humble, so she wasn't drawn into the temptation of thinking somehow she was better than other people. And also to make it clear to folks that don't get those kind of dreams, this is not because there's something wrong with you. God gives dreams for a reason. God gives dreams for a purpose. And that reason or purpose is not to elevate the ego of the person who has the dream or the vision. It is not. We tend to take those dreams, human beings, because we're human beings. We're broken by sin. We're fallen. We got issues. We got all sorts of issues. And we get these dreams and we get these visions, and we see this a lot in the world around us. That people really do think that that's all about them. That they're at the center of it. That they're the big wig and the big deal, and I've got this grand vision, and I'm just going to force the world into the mold that I think it ought to fit into. And you can go back and look at great visionaries of the past who had that. Thomas Edison was one. Thomas Edison, smart guy, had a lot of great ideas, did a lot of awful things to his competitors. Because for Thomas Edison, it was all about Thomas Edison. What can I do? How great can I be? What can I achieve? What can I become? He did a lot of great things. Massive ego. Massive ego. Dreams can do that. if we do like Joseph seemed to be doing and take that dream and mistakenly assume that we're the main character in the dream, that the story is about us, that the plan is about us, but it's not. It's not. It's God's story. It's God's plan. He's just letting us know that we've got a part to play in it. And gives us a hint and a glimpse of what that part is going to be. And a God-given dream is not a promise of an easy road. This is the other thing that comes. A lot of times when folks have dreams and have visions and ideas, and it's like, oh, this is great. I feel like God has promised this. And then again, no plan survives contact with the enemy. And everyone's got a plan until they get hit. And having a dream, a vision from God, is not a promise of an easy road. These dreams that Joseph had were from God. They were predicting the future. They were showing Joseph what his future held. But the path to that future led through getting beaten up by his brothers, sold by his family into slavery, used as a slave, betrayed as a slave when his employer's wife lied about him and said he made sexual advances to her when she's the one that made advances to him. And so he went from the unenviable position of being a slave to to the even more unenviable position of being a prisoner. And he was thrown in jail, where he was forgotten for years and years and years. That was the road that Joseph traveled. Betrayal by family, taken to a foreign land where he didn't know the language, and was different from the culture, where he lived as a slave and then as a prisoner before the dream finally became a reality. A dream from God is not a promise of an easy road. And often it's the thing that maybe we can hold on to, and God gives us that dream so that when things get bad, as they do, that we can keep going, even through the difficult times and even through the dark times. We don't know that these dreams did that for Joseph. There's no point in Joseph's story where the bad things are happening where we're told that Joseph went, but God gave me that dream, so I know it's going to get better. We have no sense that the dreams had any sort of inspirational power in Joseph's life as he was traveling this dark and winding road into his future, a road that was filled with uncertainty and powerlessness in a system stacked against him. So what's the purpose of a dream then? If it's not to give that vision, to give that sense of hope that carries us through, what is the purpose of a dream? It can be part of that, but the purpose of the dream really is to reveal God's sovereign power and purpose. God gave Joseph the dream not so Joseph would know that he was more important somehow. God gave Joseph the dream so that in the end, Joseph would know that God was the one that was working in his life. That God was the central player here. That God's power and God's purpose were over everything else that was happening to him. The dream wasn't there to elevate Joseph in Joseph's eyes, certainly not there to elevate Joseph in his brother's eyes. The dream was there to elevate God in Joseph's eyes, so that Joseph would know this is God. The next time we see Joseph talking about, thinking about, even remembering this dream is over 20 years later. He was a slave. He was thrown in prison. He got out of prison because he interpreted Pharaoh's dream. Pharaoh had a dream. And none of his magi, none of his wise men could interpret the dream. And a fellow prisoner of Joseph, who was now a servant to Pharaoh, said, hey, there's a guy in jail that interprets dreams. And so Pharaoh asked him, and Joseph interpreted the dream. And Pharaoh's like, that's it. That's it. Joseph's got it. And he was so overwhelmed by Joseph's wisdom, insight, and understanding that he put Joseph in charge of his empire, second only to the Pharaoh. And the meaning of the dream was that there was going to be 7 years of prosperity in Egypt, tremendous prosperity with tremendous harvests. And then there was going to be 7 years of famine. And so Joseph was put in charge of harvesting. And during those years of prosperity, we're going to get to that. It wasn't all lambs and bunnies. The Pharaoh used it to do a massive land grab and got extraordinarily wealthy through all of this. And Joseph helped him do it. But he put Joseph in charge, and they stored up grain. They created these massive warehouses and storehouses so that when the famine times hit, they would have food to live on. When the famine times hit, it hit even up in Canaan. And Jacob sent their brothers down, Joseph's brothers down to Egypt and said, I've heard there's food in Egypt. Go get some food in Egypt. And they came down, and there was Joseph in charge of the whole thing. And they didn't recognize it. It had been 20 years. Joseph was a little more than a kid when they sold him. And they thought he was dead or at most enslaved somewhere. They had no idea where he was. Certainly didn't expect to see him sitting on a throne acting in the name of the Pharaoh. But when they came to ask for food, they bowed down to him. And the Bible says Joseph remembered the dream. He also remembered that his brothers had been really, really awful to him. And he wanted to find out whether they had grown any. So he put them through some tests. I'm not going to go through all of it this morning, but to see whether they would betray Joseph's younger brother Benjamin in the same way they betrayed him. But they hadn't, and they wouldn't, and they didn't. And finally, Joseph revealed himself to his brothers. And he knew that he had power over them at that point. And they knew that he had power over them at that point. Now the stacking had tipped the other direction. And Joseph, to reassure them, said this to them. In the moment of the dream intersected with reality, he had a choice. He could despise and seek revenge against his brothers. He could say, you dirty, rotten, awful folks, I'm going to get you back. Or he could do what he decided to do, which is to recognize and surrender to the hand and purpose of God, including his brother's role in God's purpose. Hear this. This is what Joseph said. Do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now there has been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years there will be no plowing and reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. When Joseph finally remembered the dream, when his brothers were bowing down to him, Joseph understood that God gave him that dream so he would know that his enslavement was God's purpose and plan, not his brother's. That his imprisonment was part of God's purpose and plan, not his brother's. That his elevation was part of God's purpose and plan, not his own wonderfulness. So that Joseph could see that all of these things that had happened to him, the good, the bad, and the ugly, were part of God's purpose and God's plan, not for Joseph's sake, but for the sake of others, so that others could live. Joseph's whole family could live now. They would be saved from the famine because of what God had led Joseph through and what God had brought Joseph through. And it was dark and it was painful and it was hard, but there was a purpose behind it. And that purpose was to save lives. And that's what Joseph saw in that moment. As that dream came back to him, when his brothers bowed down before him, that this, whatever bad thoughts he'd been thinking about his brothers for those 20-some years he was in Egypt, whatever they were, he was like, no, I get it now. This was God. God did this. And it's not an awful thing. It was a painful thing, but it wasn't an awful thing. It was a saving thing. It was a saving thing. You see, God's intent trumps our intent and our feelings. Even years later, Years later, the whole family moved to Egypt. Jacob got him some really nice land. The Pharaoh said, bring your family down. Glad they're here. Gave him some great land. And then Jacob died years later. And the brothers were like, now he's going to get us. Now we're in trouble. They kind of came to Joseph, hey, Joe, just really want to say thank you for all the nice things you've done. And Joseph was like, don't worry. Don't worry. And then what he said to them then is a line you've probably heard before. What you intended for evil, God intended for good. You meant to do me harm. But God meant this for good. And God's intent trumps our intent and our feelings every time. God's plans and God's purposes trump, you intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. Years later, Joseph could still see it. And because he could see it, he could forgive his brothers. Because he could see that, he could love his brothers. Because he could see that, he was able to show mercy and compassion to his brothers. Because he could see God's hand in all of this, it was easier for him to let go of the temptation to spite and hatred and revenge. And I think that's why God gives us visions. Why God gives us dreams. So that when it happens, we can see that it was God. Not our own ingenuity, not our own wisdom, not our own greatness, not our own wonderfulness. And so when we hit the rough spots along the way, we can see, you know what? This is God too. This is God too. Walking through all of this mess, all of this pain, all of this heartache to get to this place that God promised we would get to. Again, not everybody's a dreamer, but I got a feeling we got some dreamers in the room. Some folks with some visions of the future. And I'm wondering, is that God? Maybe you already know it's God. Maybe you've got this vision, like, I don't know how that's ever going to happen. However it happens, if it's from God, God will bring it. God will make it happen. God will bring you to that point. And the thing is to remember that it's God. Joseph had a lot of work to do along the way. It was not an easy road. God didn't just pluck him up and drop him down in a throne someplace. But all of that work, all of that pain, all of that heartache, all had purpose. And the dream was a sign that God was there all along the way. Hold on to that with your dreams. That promise from God. And trust God with it. And let it humble you and let it inspire you to grace and compassion for others. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen.